Luke was an active-duty Navy SEAL driving across the blistering Arizona desert with just $300 and a heavy grief he could not outrun. He had spent the last 3 years isolating himself after losing his older brother in combat. He just wanted to get to his new base and disappear. But when he pulled his truck into an abandoned gas station on Route 66, a faint, raspy sound broke the silence. Tied to a splintered wooden pole, left to die in the 100-degree heat, was a severely emaciated German shepherd. Luke did not know it yet, but breaking that rusted chain would uncover a secret from his past he thought was lost forever. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The tires of the 1998 Ford F-150 hummed a monotonous tune against the cracked asphalt of Route 66. The Arizona sun hung high in a cloudless sky, baking the earth below. Heat waves distorted the horizon, making the distant mesas look like they were melting into the road. Luke sat behind the wheel. He kept his posture straight, a habit ingrained from over a decade of military service. He was 34 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL. His dark hair was clipped close to his scalp. His face bore the weathered texture of harsh climates, and his eyes, a pale shade of gray, stayed fixed on the empty road ahead. He wore a simple olive-green t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders and a pair of faded denim jeans. The air conditioning in the truck had broken down 300 miles ago. Luke did not care. He rolled the window down, letting the hot, dry wind blast his face. He preferred the discomfort. It gave him something immediate to focus on. It kept his mind away from the quiet corners where the memories lived. For days, he had been driving. He was transferring to a new naval base in California. He chose to drive instead of fly. He needed the isolation. He needed the sheer, punishing distance of the American West to put space between himself and his last combat deployment. He also needed space from the empty house he had cleared out in Ohio, the house that used to belong to his family before time and tragedy took them away one by one. His parents had passed, and his older brother had fallen in combat years ago. Now, it was just him. Grief rarely announces itself loudly after the first few years. It settles into the bones, becoming a quiet companion that dictates how a person stands, how they breathe, and how tightly they hold onto a steering wheel. Luke kept his foot steady on the gas pedal. The engine roared, a mechanical beast fighting against the desert heat. The fuel gauge needle dipped dangerously close to the red line. He tapped the glass of the dashboard with his index finger. The needle did not move. He needed gas soon, or he would be walking. Walking out here in the middle of the afternoon meant serious trouble, even for someone with his survival training. He checked his side mirrors. Nothing but heat shimmer and empty road behind him. He looked forward. A rusted billboard appeared in the distance, its paint peeling away to reveal the raw metal underneath. "Last stop before the canyon," it read in faded red letters. Below it stood a small, dilapidated gas station. The canopy hung at a crooked angle. The paint on the cinder-block building was entirely gone, blasted away by years of sand and wind. Luke eased his foot off the accelerator. He steered the truck off the highway. The tires crunched loudly against the loose gravel. Dust plumed up behind the vehicle, coating the tailgate in a fine layer of red dirt. He parked next to the only pump that looked remotely functional. He turned the key. The engine sputtered and died. The sudden silence was absolute. Out here, there were no birds, no crickets, no rustling leaves. Just the oppressive weight of the sun beating down on metal and rock. Luke opened the door and stepped out. His heavy combat boots hit the gravel with a solid thud. The heat enveloped him immediately, pressing down on his shoulders like a physical weight. He stretched to doctor his back, feeling his joints pop in protest. He walked around the front of the truck toward the pump. He grabbed the nozzle. It was hot to the touch, baking in the direct sunlight. He swiped his credit card in the dusty machine. Miraculously, the small digital screen beeped and authorized the transaction. He inserted the nozzle into his truck and squeezed the metal handle. The gasoline flowed with a low hiss. Luke leaned against the side of his truck, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked around the neglected property. The main building had boarded-up windows. A faded sign above the door read, "Ice and cold drinks." But the heavy padlock on the door told a different story. The place had been abandoned for months, maybe years, except for the automated fuel pumps that someone likely serviced once a week. Then he heard it. It was not a loud noise. It was a faint, raspy scrape. It sounded like sandpaper rubbing against dry wood. Luke stopped breathing. His military training kicked in instantly. His posture stiffened. His eyes scanned the perimeter. His ears tuned out the hiss of the gas pump. He located the source of the sound. It came from the side of the abandoned building, near a thick wooden telephone pole. He let go of the gas nozzle. He walked slowly toward the side of the building. His footsteps were silent on the dirt. He turned the corner. He stopped dead in his tracks. Tied to the base of the splintered wooden pole was a German shepherd. The animal lay flat on its side in the baking dirt. It was completely exposed to the sun. There was no shade, no bowl of water, no blanket. Just the dog, the dirt, and a heavy, rusted metal chain. Luke stared. The dog was horrifyingly thin. Its ribcage protruded sharply against its black and tan fur. The fur itself was dull, matted with mud and dust, sticking up in uneven patches. The dog's breathing was shallow and erratic, creating the raspy sound Luke had heard. Its tongue hung loosely from its mouth, cracked and dry like old leather. The pads of its paws looked blistered from the burning ground. The chain around its neck was thick, the kind used for towing heavy vehicles. It was wrapped tightly, digging into the skin, and secured to the pole with a heavy padlock. The ground around the pole was scratched and dug out into a shallow trench, showing the frantic, desperate struggle the animal had put up before finally collapsing from exhaustion and severe dehydration. Luke took a step closer. His tall shadow fell over the dog's face, offering a tiny patch of relief from the blinding light. The German shepherd slowly opened its eyes. They were a deep, murky brown. They did not hold fear. They did not hold hope. They held a profound, hollow exhaustion. The dog looked at Luke, let out a tiny, broken sigh, and closed its eyes again, resigning itself to the unforgiving heat. Someone had driven out to the middle of nowhere, chained this animal to a pole, and driven away. They had left it here to die a slow, agonizing death under the Arizona sun. Luke stood frozen. A cold fury began to rise in his chest, cutting straight through the desert heat. He had seen the worst of humanity in war zones across the globe. He had seen destruction, cruelty, and malice. But looking at this helpless creature, left to die in the dirt for absolutely no reason, struck a nerve he thought he had deadened long ago. The gas pump clicked loudly, signaling the tank was full. Luke did not look back at the truck, his jaw set. His hands curled into tight fists. The rigid rules he lived by, the principles of staying out of civilian matters, the plan to drive straight through to California, all of it vanished into the hot desert air. He stepped forward. He knelt in the dirt beside the dog. Luke knelt in the red dirt. The heat radiating off the ground hit his face like the blast from an open oven. He ignored the sweat stinging his eyes. He focused entirely on the animal in front of him. The German shepherd did not lift its head. It merely opened its eyes again. Its breathing came in short, painful rasps. Each inhale seemed to require massive effort. Luke observed the collar. A rusted padlock secured a heavy metal chain around the animal's neck. The links dug deep into the skin, leaving raw, angry marks. Luke extended his hand slowly. The dog flinched, a tiny tremor running through its emaciated body, but it lacked the energy to pull away. Luke touched the metal chain. It burned his fingers. He pulled his hand back. Luke stood up. He turned his head and looked at his truck. He had a strict timeline. He had orders to report to his new command in California. A Navy SEAL operates on discipline. You execute the mission. You do not deviate. For the past 3 years, Luke had built an impenetrable wall around his life. Do your job. Mind your own business. Survive the day. Getting involved in civilian matters meant unpredictable complications. Complications brought attachments, and attachments inevitably brought pain. He had learned that lesson thoroughly in the rocky valleys of Afghanistan. He looked down at the dog again. The animal stared back at him. There was no frantic pleading in those dark brown eyes. There was only a quiet, absolute acceptance of the approaching end. It was a specific, haunting look that Luke recognized instantly. He had seen that exact expression on the faces of good men holding their own fatal wounds, waiting silently for a medical evacuation helicopter that they already knew would arrive too late. People often talk about the primal instinct to survive, but true heartbreak lies in witnessing the exact moment a living creature decides to stop fighting. The silence of the desert pressed heavily against Luke's eardrums. The only sound for miles was the dog's ragged intake of air. Every shallow breath mocked Luke's rules. He walked back to his Ford F-150. His boots crushed the gravel with heavy, deliberate force. He moved to the truck bed. He opened the weathered metal toolbox bolted behind the cab. He pushed aside jumper cables, flares, and a socket set. He grabbed a pair of industrial bolt cutters. The tool was heavy, forged from solid steel. He slammed the toolbox shut. The metallic crash echoed sharply across the empty highway, startling nothing. He walked back to the wooden pole. The dog watched his approach with dull, unblinking eyes. Luke knelt in the dirt once more. He positioned the heavy iron jaws of the bolt cutters over the thickest link of the chain, right next to the rusted padlock. He gripped the rubber handles firmly. He adjusted his stance, planting his boots into the dust. He applied pressure. The muscles in his forearms and shoulders coiled tight. The metal groaned under the extreme force. With a loud, sharp snap, the steel link broke. The heavy chain hit the ground. The dog remained completely still. It did not register the sudden lack of weight around its neck. It simply lacked the strength to realize it was finally free. Luke tossed the heavy bolt cutters onto the dirt. He slid his hands gently under the dog's body. The animal felt terrifyingly light. There was almost no muscle mass left, only prominent bones covered in matted, dusty fur. Luke lifted the dog. The animal let out a weak, barely audible whimper. It made no effort to struggle. Its large head lolled backward, coming to rest against Luke's chest. Luke turned and carried the animal toward the truck. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, but Luke maintained a steady, measured pace. He reached the passenger side of the vehicle. He managed to unlatch and open the heavy door using one hand. He laid the dog gently onto the worn fabric seat. The dog collapsed immediately, curling into a tight defensive ball. Luke went to the back seat of the cab. He retrieved a large insulated metal thermos. It held his emergency water supply. He unscrewed the cap. He grabbed a clean cotton rag from the center console. He poured water onto the rag until it was completely saturated. He walked around to the passenger side and leaned into the cabin. He pressed the dripping wet cloth against the dog's cracked nose and dry tongue. The dog flinched at the sudden, unfamiliar moisture. Then, a deep survival instinct flickered to life. A dry, pale tongue extended hesitantly. The dog began to lick the water from the rough fabric. Luke squeezed the rag gently. He let small, controlled drops fall directly into the dog's mouth. He knew better than to offer a full bowl. Giving too much water to a severely dehydrated body would induce vomiting and dangerous shock. He had to be patient. For 20 minutes, the only movement at the abandoned gas station was Luke soaking the rag and the dog weakly swallowing the drops. The interior of the truck cabin trapped the desert heat, turning into an oven. The broken air conditioning no longer mattered to Luke. Sweat dripped down his face and soaked his green shirt. He watched the dog's chest closely. The breathing slowly began to stabilize. The harsh, raspy sound softened slightly. The dog opened its eyes fully and looked at Luke. This time, there was a faint spark of awareness in the brown depths. Luke poured a little more water onto the rag. He carefully wiped away the thick crust of dried mud around the dog's eyes and snout. He looked at the occupied passenger seat. His solitary journey was officially over. His rigid schedule was destroyed. He had broken his own cardinal rule, and for the first time in years, he did not regret it. He closed the passenger door securely. He walked around to the driver's side, climbed in, and started the engine. He put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the burning asphalt of Route 66. The Ford F-150 rattled as it merged back onto Route 66. The cabin temperature remained brutal. Luke rolled his window down further, hoping the hot wind would create some circulation. The air tasted of dust and dry sage. The German Shepherd lay curled tightly on the passenger seat. It kept its body pressed against the door panel, creating as much distance as possible between itself and the human driving the truck. Luke glanced over. The dog's eyes were open, tracking his every movement with a dull, guarded caution. It was the look of a creature that expected the next touch to bring pain. It is a profound tragedy of the living experience that those who deserve kindness the most are often the ones most terrified to receive it. Trust is a shattered mirror that takes immense patience to piece back together. Luke knew this better than anyone. He did not reach out to pet the animal. He did not speak in high-pitched, soothing tones. He simply drove, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel and his movements slow and predictable. The road stretched out like a gray ribbon cutting through a wasteland. The heat mirages danced on the asphalt, creating illusions of water pools that vanished upon approach. Luke needed to find a veterinarian, but his current location offered nothing but scrub brush, rocks, and the occasional rusted-out chassis of a forgotten vehicle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He tossed it onto the center console. The screen displayed no service in the top corner. He let out a slow breath. He would have to keep driving until he hit a town large enough to have a clinic or at least a working cell tower. The miles ticked by. The monotonous hum of the tires filled the silence of the cab. Every 15 minutes, Luke slowed the truck down. He picked up the damp rag from the console. He held it out toward the passenger seat. The dog flinched initially, pulling its head back. Luke held steady. He waited. Hunger and thirst eventually overpowered fear. The dog leaned forward slowly and licked the moisture from the cloth. Luke repeated this process carefully, ensuring the animal got enough water to survive, but not enough to trigger vomiting. He watched the dry throat work, swallowing the tiny drops of salvation. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the desert floor. The harsh, blinding light softened into a deep, bruised orange, painting the mesas in shades of violet and crimson. The temperature inside the cab finally dropped a few degrees. The dog's ragged breathing seemed to ease slightly with the changing weather. Luke picked up his phone again. Still no signal. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. The fuel gauge was full, but time was a different kind of currency. A severely dehydrated dog needed intravenous fluids, not just drops from a rag. The ribs sticking out against the matted fur were a constant reminder of how close to the edge this animal was. He pressed harder on the gas pedal. The engine roared in response, pushing the heavy truck faster along the lonely stretch of highway. The dog shifted on the seat. It let out a low groan, attempting to find a more comfortable position on its prominent bones. Luke kept his eyes forward. He did not want to stare and make the animal uncomfortable. He just listened. He heard the scrape of dry claws against the fabric upholstery. He heard the rustle of dirty fur against the vinyl door panel. Then, he felt something. It was a light, hesitant pressure against his right thigh. Luke looked down, breaking his rule of keeping his eyes on the road for a fraction of a second. The German Shepherd had moved from its defensive curl against the passenger door. It had dragged its exhausted body across the seat, crossing the invisible boundary of the center console. The dog had placed its large, heavy head squarely onto Luke's leg. Luke froze. He did not shift his weight. He did not move his leg. He kept his foot steady on the accelerator. The dog closed its eyes. A long, shuddering sigh escaped its snout, releasing a cloud of hot, dry breath against Luke's jeans. The animal was surrendering completely. It had exhausted its final reserves of fear and suspicion. It had decided that this man, this stranger who smelled of sweat and old canvas, was a safe harbor in a cruel world. A sudden tightness gripped Luke's throat. He blinked hard, staring intently at the endless highway ahead. The landscape blurred. Hot moisture gathered in the corners of his pale gray eyes. He had spent years building a fortress around his emotions, convinced that feeling nothing was the only way to survive the losses he had endured. He had trained his body to be a weapon and his mind to be a steel vault. Yet, the simple, trusting weight of a dying animal resting its head on his leg cracked that fortress wide open. The absolute vulnerability of the gesture broke through his defenses completely. He reached down slowly, giving the dog plenty of time to react. He rested his large, calloused hand on top of the dog's head. The fur was coarse and thick with dirt. He let his hand stay there. He did not stroke or pat. He just offered a solid, grounding presence. The dog did not flinch. It leaned heavier into his touch, seeking the warmth of his palm. "Hold on," Luke said softly, his voice raspy from disuse. "Just hold on a little longer." He picked up his phone with his left hand. One bar of signal flickered on the screen. He quickly dialed the operator, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization. The road signs began to change, indicating a small outpost town approaching in 10 miles. The connection crackled to life, and Luke spoke clearly, demanding the location of the nearest animal clinic. The journey had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer just a solitary soldier running from his past. He was a protector, and he had a mission sitting right beside him. The town appeared on the horizon as a cluster of low buildings baking under the late afternoon sun. It was barely a dot on the map. A faded sign announced the population as under 2,000. The main street consisted of a diner, a hardware store, and a few scattered businesses with dusty windows. Luke slowed the Ford F-150. He scanned the storefronts carefully. He needed a veterinarian. Near the edge of town, a small cinder block building stood alone. A wooden sign shaped like a dog bone hung above the door, reading Miller Animal Clinic. Luke parked the truck near the entrance. He turned off the engine. The silence of the town felt heavy and isolated. He opened the passenger door. The German Shepherd lay exactly where it had been, its head resting on the edge of the seat. Its breathing was still shallow. Luke reached in and scooped the animal into his arms. The dog felt limp. The heat of the day had drained whatever small energy it had recovered during the drive. Luke carried the dog to the clinic door. He kicked it open with his boot. A bell jingled loudly. The interior of the clinic was cool and dim. Veterinary clinics all smell exactly the same, a sharp mixture of rubbing alcohol, wet fur, and the lingering anxiety of 100 different animals. Luke stood in the small reception area, adjusting the weight in his arms. A man emerged from the back room. He was older, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses resting low on his nose. He wore a faded plaid shirt beneath a slightly wrinkled white coat. This was Dr. Miller. He looked at Luke, then immediately at the dog. "Bring him back here," Dr. Miller said. He did not ask questions. He did not ask for paperwork. He saw an emergency and reacted. Luke followed the veterinarian into an examination room. A stainless steel table sat in the center. Luke placed the German Shepherd gently onto the cold metal. The dog did not resist. It just let its head fall against the table, completely exhausted. "Found him tied to a pole at an abandoned gas station," Luke said. His voice was flat and direct. "He has been in the sun for an unknown amount of time. Severe dehydration, starvation." Dr. Miller nodded. He pulled a stethoscope from his pocket and pressed it against the dog's sunken chest. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Heartbeat is weak and irregular," Dr. Miller said. "He is in severe shock. We need to get fluids into him immediately." The veterinarian moved quickly. He opened a glass cabinet and pulled out an IV bag, plastic tubing, and a needle. He grabbed a pair of clippers. He shaved a small patch of fur on the dog's front leg. The skin underneath was pale and dry. "Doctor." Miller found a vein and inserted the needle. He taped it down securely and adjusted the flow of the clear liquid. Luke stood back. He watched the steady drip of the IV fluid descending through the tube. He crossed his arms over his chest. "He is starving," Dr. Miller said, examining the dog's ribs. "His body has started consuming its own muscle tissue to survive. The dehydration is the most immediate threat, but the malnutrition is a close second. His paws are burned. He has sores around his neck from a heavy collar." "A heavy chain," Luke corrected firmly. Dr. Miller looked up. He sighed, shaking his head slowly. "Some people do not deserve to share oxygen with the rest of us." The veterinarian continued his physical examination. He checked the dog's teeth, its ears, and its joints. The clinic remained completely quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. "This will not be a cheap visit, son, doctor," Miller said without looking away from the dog. "The fluids? The antibiotics for these open sores? The overnight observation? It adds up fast. I need to know you are prepared for that reality." Luke reached into his back pocket. He pulled out his worn leather wallet. He opened it. Inside sat 3 crisp $100 bills. It was his emergency cash. It was the money meant to cover his food and unexpected gas expenses for the rest of the trip to California. Navy paychecks were steady, but a move across the country always drained the bank account. If he spent this money now, he would be eating stale protein bars and sleeping in the driver's seat for the next few days. He did not hesitate. He pulled the bills out and placed them flat on the stainless steel counter next to the examination table. "Do whatever you need to do," Luke said. Dr. Miller looked at the cash, then at Luke. He nodded slowly. He understood the sacrifice being made. "Let us get these wounds cleaned up," Dr. Miller said. He took a small plastic bottle of antiseptic solution and a stack of clean gauze pads. He began dabbing at the raw, angry marks around the dog's neck. The dog flinched slightly at the sting, but remained completely still. "There is a deep laceration on the inside of his left ear." "Doctor," Miller noted, "looks like an old injury that got severely infected. I need to shave the area to clean it properly." Dr. Miller picked up the electric clippers again. He gently took the dog's left ear between his fingers. He turned the clippers on. The buzzing sound filled the small room. He carefully ran the metal teeth of the clippers over the matted fur on the inside flap of the ear. The thick, dirty hair fell away in clumps onto the metal table. Luke watched the process silently. He kept his eyes on the dog's face, looking for signs of distress. The animal seemed to have fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep, lulled by the cool air and the steady flow of hydration into its bloodstream. Suddenly, the buzzing sound stopped. "Doctor," Miller turned off the clippers. He set them down heavily on the counter. He leaned in closer to the dog's ear. He pulled his glasses down slightly to get a better look. He reached for a wet cotton ball and wiped away the remaining dust and loose fur from the exposed skin. Luke uncrossed his arms. He stepped closer to the table. "Is it a tumor, doctor?" Miller did not answer right away. He kept staring at the patch of bare skin. His expression changed from clinical focus to profound surprise. He took a small penlight from his chest pocket and clicked it on. He directed the bright beam onto the dog's ear. "No," Dr. Miller said softly. His voice sounded entirely different. "It is not a tumor." Luke moved to stand directly next to the veterinarian. He looked down at the specific area Dr. Miller was illuminating. Beneath the layer of dirt and old scar tissue, etched deep into the pale skin of the inner ear flap, was a series of small, faded blue markings. They were not random scratches. They were deliberate symbols. Luke recognized the format instantly. It was an identification code, a specific sequence of letters and numbers permanently inked into the flesh. "A tattoo," Luke said, his voice dropping an octave. Dr. Miller clicked off the penlight. He looked up at Luke. The older man's eyes were wide behind his glasses. "Yes, doctor," Miller replied carefully. "But this is not a regular breeder's mark. I spent 10 years working near a military base before I moved out here. I know exactly what this is." Luke stared at the faded blue numbers. His heart rate picked up speed. The quiet room suddenly felt very small and tight. The dog on the table was no longer just a random stray found on a desert highway. The identification code changed everything completely. Dr. Miller stepped back from the examination table. He pointed a steady finger at the faded blue ink inside the German shepherd's ear. "Military working dog," the veterinarian stated. "That specific sequence, a letter followed by numbers. They do that at Lackland Air Force Base. This animal served." Luke stared at the ink. The fluorescent lights of the clinic buzzed softly overhead. He looked at the dog's rib cage, the matted fur, the burned paws. He saw the animal through a completely different lens now. Before, the dog was a victim of cruel abandonment. Now, the dog was a fellow soldier. War leaves physical markers. Some are visible, like the jagged line of a shrapnel wound. Others are invisible, buried deep within the nervous system. The narrator notes that scars do not just represent past injuries, they are a permanent map of the specific violent moments a body has survived. Luke traced a large, hairless patch on the dog's shoulder. He recognized the pattern of a blast injury. He had identical marks on his own left leg. "Can you read the whole number?" Luke asked. Dr. Miller leaned in again. He used his thumb to stretch the skin slightly. "Looks like Tango, 842. Luke repeated the sequence silently. T-842. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. He looked at the screen. 1 bar of signal. It was weak, but it might connect. "I need to make a call," Luke said. "Go ahead, doctor," Miller replied. He turned his attention back to the IV bag. "I am going to start him on a broad-spectrum antibiotic and dress these wounds." Luke walked out of the examination room. He pushed the heavy glass door of the clinic open. The late afternoon heat hit him immediately. He walked a few paces away from the building, holding the phone up to catch a better signal. He dialed a number he knew by heart. The line clicked and hummed. It rang 3 times. "Marcus," a voice answered. The connection was static-filled. Marcus was a logistics and intelligence analyst stationed at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. He and Luke had served together in Fallujah. Marcus handled data. He knew how to find things hidden in government servers. "It is Luke. I need a favor, a fast one." "You are supposed to be driving," Marcus said. "Where are you?" "Arizona. Middle of nowhere. Listen to me. I need you to run an ID number through the military working dog database." Silence hung on the line for a second. "Did you find a stray?" "Tied to a pole," Luke confirmed. "He is in bad shape, but he has a tattoo. Tango, 842. I need his service record." Keyboard keys clacked rapidly in the background. Marcus did not ask any more questions. He understood the urgency in Luke's voice. "Give me a minute," Marcus said. "The system is slow today." "I will wait," Luke replied. Luke stood in the dusty parking lot. To abandon an animal was a crime. To abandon a veteran who had served the country was an act of profound betrayal. Luke felt a tight knot of anger twist in his stomach. He focused on his breathing, forcing his heart rate down. He walked back inside the clinic. The bell jingled above the door. He kept the phone pressed to his ear. "Doctor," Miller was wrapping a white bandage around the dog's front paw. The dog remained asleep on the table, exhausted and heavily medicated. The IV fluid level had dropped significantly. "Still running the search," Marcus said over the phone. "Take your time," Luke said. Luke leaned against the wall near the examination table. He opened an Armed Forces news application on his phone to test the internet connection while Marcus worked. The application loaded a live audio stream. He kept the volume low. A news anchor discussed an upcoming training exercise. The clinic was quiet. "Doctor," Miller finished the bandage and moved to a small sink to wash his hands. The water ran softly. On the phone stream, the news segment ended. A recorded promotional clip played. It featured the sounds of a military parade ground. A loud, sharp voice echoed through the phone speaker. "Company, attention!" The words were crisp and authoritative. On the metal table, the German shepherd's eyes snapped open. The exhaustion vanished instantly. The dog's ears swiveled forward, locking onto the sound coming from Luke's hand. Despite the severe dehydration, despite the starved muscles and the IV line attached to its leg, the animal reacted to the deeply ingrained command. The dog struggled to rise. Its claws slipped on the smooth, stainless steel. It pushed its front legs straight and forced its weak hindquarters upward. The animal stood on the table. Its posture was rigid. Its head was held high. The dog ignored the pain in its burned paws. It ignored the needles and bandages. It stood in a perfect, unwavering military stance, waiting for the next order. Luke stopped breathing. He stared at the dog. The sheer discipline radiating from the emaciated animal was staggering. It was a ghost of a warrior, summoned back to life by a single word. Dr. Miller turned away from the sink. He looked at the dog, a towel frozen in his hands. He did not say a word. "Luke," Marcus's voice broke the silence on the phone line. "I have the file." Luke did not look away from the dog. He brought the phone closer to his mouth. "Read it to me." "His name is Titan," Marcus said. The analyst's voice sounded tight. "Specialized search dog. Explosive detection. 3 tours in Afghanistan." Luke looked at Titan. The dog maintained its rigid posture, its dark brown eyes focused entirely on Luke, waiting for a command. Luke felt a profound sense of respect wash over him. This was not a pet. This was a soldier who had walked point in front of patrols, sniffing out improvised explosive devices so the men behind him could go home. He was retired with honors 4 years ago due to age, Marcus continued. He was adopted out to a civilian contractor. The contractor died a year later. After that, the record gets messy. Bounced around a few shelters. Then he just disappears. "He has not disappeared anymore," Luke said firmly. "He is right in front of me." Titan swayed slightly on his weak legs. The effort of standing at attention was draining his minimal reserves. Luke stepped forward immediately. He placed a gentle hand on the dog's chest. "At ease, Titan," Luke commanded softly. "Rest." The dog recognized the tone of authority, mixed with permission. The rigid posture dissolved. Titan collapsed back onto the metal table with a heavy sigh. His eyes closed, and the deep, raspy breathing resumed. The dog knew Luke understood the rules. "Luke," Marcus said, "there is something else in this file. You need to hear this." Luke kept his hand resting on Titan's side. He watched the chest rise and fall. "Go ahead," Luke replied. "It is about his first handler," Marcus said carefully. "The one who trained him." Luke waited. The small clinic felt completely silent. Luke stood in the quiet clinic. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Titan lay on the stainless steel table, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "Doctor." Miller stood near the counter, pretending to organize medical supplies, giving Luke space. "His first handler," Luke repeated. He kept his hand resting lightly on Titan's side, feeling the steady thud of the dog's heart. "What about him?" On the other end of the line, Marcus sighed. The sound carried the heavy weight of someone looking at a screen they did not want to read. Marcus was a data analyst. He spent his life turning human lives into statistics. The narrator observes that the military bureaucracy has a unique way of reducing a lifetime of terror, loyalty, and sacrifice into cold, sterile data points on a screen, leaving no room for the soul of the soldier. But right now, the analyst sounded completely human. "Titan was born at Lackland," Marcus said. "He went through the specialized search dog program. He was a natural. They paired him with a young handler fresh out of training. They deployed to Helmand Province together." Luke nodded, even though Marcus could not see him. Helmand was a nightmare. Luke knew that dirt well. If this dog survived multiple tours there, he was exceptional. They did 2 tours together, Marcus continued. His voice was methodical, reading the official logs. They cleared roads. They searched compounds. Titan found 12 improvised explosive devices during their first deployment alone. He saved a lot of lives, Luke. Entire squads walked home because this dog sniffed out wires buried under the dirt. Luke looked down at the matted fur and the prominent ribs of the animal on the table. It was hard to reconcile the broken creature he found at the gas station with the hero Marcus described. "What happened after the second tour?" Luke asked. "They got hit," Marcus said quietly. "During a clearance operation, an ambush. Titan took some shrapnel. He recovered fast. He went back to work. But he got reassigned." "Reassigned?" Luke asked. His grip on the phone tightened. "His handler did not make it, Luke," Marcus said. The static on the line hissed softly. The handler was killed in action during that ambush. Titan was standing right next to him. A cold sensation washed over Luke. He looked at Titan's face. The dog was sleeping, exhausted by the brief moment of military discipline. Luke thought about the loyalty of a working dog. They do not fight for politics. They do not fight for medals. They fight entirely for the person holding the leash. Losing that person was a catastrophic wound, one that no bandage could fix. After that, Titan did 1 more tour with a new guy, Marcus read. But he was getting older. His joints were stiff. They retired him. The military adopted him out to a civilian contractor who worked on base. The contractor was a decent guy, kept him for a year, but then he died of a heart attack. Luke closed his eyes for a second. The story was a cascading series of losses. "Then the system failed him," Marcus said, his tone turning bitter. The contractor had no family. Titan went to a county shelter. From there, a rescue group pulled him. They adopted him out to a family in Arizona. The file says the family returned him after 3 months. Claimed he was too aloof. Said he paced the house at night and refused to play fetch. "He is a combat veteran," Luke muttered. "Not a golden retriever." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. He got adopted out 1 more time. To a guy living off the grid near Flagstaff. That was 2 years ago. The paper trail ends there. No follow-up, no check-ins. The guy probably decided he could not afford dog food and dumped him at that gas station. Luke felt a surge of pure rage. He wanted to find the man who tied that heavy chain. He wanted to use the heavy steel tools from his truck on him. But anger was useless right now. The dog was safe. "I am keeping him," Luke stated clearly. "I am submitting the adoption paperwork. Tell me what forms I need to fill out." "Luke," Marcus said. His voice changed. The professional analyst tone vanished completely. "You need to listen to me. Send me the forms, Marcus." "Look at the file, Luke." Marcus raised his voice over the phone. "I just emailed you the PDF. Open it. Open it right now." Luke frowned. He pulled the phone away from his ear and tapped the screen. He opened his email application. A message from Marcus sat at the top of his inbox. He tapped the attachment. A digitized military document appeared. It was a standard service record. "Scroll down to the first deployment," Marcus instructed through the speaker. "Look at the name of the primary handler." Luke used his thumb to scroll down the small screen. The text was tiny. He zoomed in on the section detailing Titan's initial assignment in Helmand Province. He found the box labeled Primary Handler. Luke stopped breathing. The air in the clinic seemed to evaporate. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights faded into a distant, ringing silence. His eyes locked onto the black text on the bright screen. He read the name. He read it again. He closed his eyes, opened them, and read it a 3rd time. The letters did not change. The name remained exactly the same. It was a name Luke had spoken every day of his childhood. It was a name carved into a white marble headstone in Ohio. It was the name of the man who had taught Luke how to throw a baseball, how to drive a truck, and how to tie a military uniform boot. His older brother. Luke's hand began to shake. The phone felt incredibly heavy. The digital screen blurred as moisture flooded his eyes. He had spent the last 3 years running from his grief, driving across empty highways, isolating himself in barracks, and shutting out the world. He had convinced himself that his brother was truly gone, erased from the earth except for a folded flag and a collection of medals sitting in a dark closet. Yet, here, in a dusty veterinary clinic in the middle of nowhere, the past had reached out and grabbed him. "Marcus," Luke whispered. His voice cracked completely. He could not form a complete sentence. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow to the chest. "I see it, brother," Marcus replied softly. The static on the line seemed to pause. "I do not know how this is possible. Out of all the roads, out of all the gas stations in the country, you found his dog." Luke slowly lowered the phone. He ended the call without saying another word. He slipped the device back into his pocket. He turned his head and looked at the emaciated German shepherd sleeping quietly on the cold stainless steel table. The IV fluid continued its steady drip. Luke stepped forward until his thighs hit the edge of the table. He reached out with both hands. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He rested his palms gently on Titan's ribcage. He felt the shallow breaths. He felt the warmth of the animal's skin. This dog had walked beside his brother. This dog had heard his brother's voice, felt his brother's touch, and stood by him in his final moments. Titan was a living, breathing connection to the person Luke loved most in the world. Dr. Miller watched from the corner of the room. The older man recognized profound shock when he saw it. He remained completely silent, respecting the sacred weight of the moment unfolding in his clinic. Luke leaned his head down until his forehead touched the dog's dusty neck. A single tear slipped down his cheek and soaked into the dark fur. The fortress Luke had built around his heart finally shattered completely. Luke lowered his phone. The device slipped from his hand and landed on the clinic floor with a dull clatter. He did not bend to pick it up. He stood completely still. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner of the room grew incredibly loud. The harsh fluorescent lights beat down on the stainless steel table. Dr. Miller took a step forward, then stopped. He recognized the heavy, suffocating silence wrapping around the younger man. The veterinarian folded his arms and waited near the sink, offering the only comfort he could provide: space. Luke kept his eyes fixed on the German shepherd. The dog lay flat on the metal surface, breathing steadily as the intravenous fluid hydrated its starved body. The name on the digital file burned in Luke's mind. It was his older brother, the man who had taught him how to fight, how to drive, and how to survive. The man who came home in a flag-draped casket 7 years ago. Memories flooded the small room. Luke saw the stack of letters sitting in a wooden box in his closet back in Ohio. His brother wrote frequently during his first deployment to Helmand Province. The letters smelled of dust and dry sweat. They rarely spoke of the danger or the violence. Instead, his brother wrote about a dog. He wrote about a young, energetic German shepherd with ears too large for its head and a nose that never missed a buried wire. "This dog is the only reason I am still walking," his brother had written in one letter. "He works harder than any Marine here. He sleeps at my feet. He watches my back. When I get out, I am bringing him home." But his brother never made it out. The ambush took him. The military sent the letters, the medals, and the uniform back. They did not send the dog. The dog belonged to the government. The dog had to keep working. Luke stared at the matted fur on the table. The vibrant, energetic animal from the letters had turned into this broken, emaciated creature. They had both lost the same person. They had both spent the last 7 years wandering through the aftermath of that loss. Grief operates like a hidden current beneath a frozen river. A person can walk across the solid surface for years, believing the water below has stopped moving, until a single fracture breaks the ice and pulls them under completely. Luke stepped closer to the table. His combat boots made heavy sounds against the linoleum floor. He reached out and placed his hand on the dog's flank. The ribs felt sharp under his palm. He traced the contour of the animal's back, feeling the scars hidden beneath the dirt. Titan opened his eyes. The dark brown irises focused on the man standing over him. The dog did not try to stand this time. The medication and the exhaustion kept him anchored to the metal surface. Luke leaned down. He brought his face close to the dog's head. He did not care about the smell of infection or the dirt. He needed to be close. He knelt on the hard floor, bringing himself to eye level with the edge of the examination table. "Titan," Luke whispered. The word caught in his throat. The dog's ears twitched. He recognized his name. He lifted his heavy head slightly off the table. He turned his snout toward Luke's face. Dogs experience the world primarily through scent. A smell can carry decades of information, bypassing time and distance. Titan flared his nostrils. He took a long, slow breath in, pulling the scent of the man in front of him deep into his lungs. Luke stayed perfectly still. He let the dog investigate. Titan exhaled a shaky breath. He inhaled again, deeper this time. The scent of sweat, desert dust, and old canvas filled his nose. But beneath those immediate smells lay something else. It was a genetic echo. It was a familiar resonance embedded in the blood and the sweat. It was the scent of the man who used to hold his leash, the man who used to share his rations in the dark, the man who had died in the dirt while Titan stood beside him. The dog's eyes widened slightly. A low, vibrating whine built in his chest. It was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of profound recognition. Titan shifted his front paws. He ignored the IV line taped to his leg. He dragged his upper body toward the edge of the table. He did not stop until his head hung over the stainless steel rim, directly in front of Luke. Luke raised his arms. He wrapped them around the dog's thick neck. He pulled the animal close, burying his face in the coarse, dusty fur. Titan let out another long whine. He rested his heavy head squarely on Luke's shoulder. He pressed his body weight against the man, seeking the comfort he had lost 7 years ago. The dog closed his eyes, surrendering to the familiar scent of family. Luke tightened his grip. The walls he had built over the years crumbled completely. He wept. He did not try to hide it. He cried for his brother. He cried for the years this dog had spent alone, bouncing from shelters to bad homes, waiting for someone who was never coming back. He cried for the sheer, impossible miracle of finding him tied to a pole in the middle of a desert. Dr. Miller turned his back to the table. He busied himself with washing a clean pair of scissors in the sink. He kept his eyes on the running water, giving the soldier and the dog the privacy they desperately needed. The clinic remained quiet, save for the hum of the lights and the sound of quiet sobbing. The universe had taken everything from Luke. It had taken his family, his home, and his peace of mind. But on a dusty stretch of Route 66, the universe had handed something back. It had returned a piece of his brother. Luke held onto the dog, feeling the steady beat of Titan's heart against his own chest. The emptiness that had haunted him for years began to recede. He was not alone anymore. He had a piece of his past, and he finally had a reason to look forward to the future. Luke stood at the front counter of the Miller Animal Clinic. He held a blue ink pen. He carefully filled out the adoption transfer forms Dr. Miller had printed. The paperwork required his name, rank, and permanent address. For the first time in years, writing down his details did not feel like a burden. He pressed the pen firmly against the paper. He signed his name at the bottom of the final page. Dr. Miller took the clipboard. He reviewed the documents. He placed them in a manila folder. "I will fax these to the Regional Rescue Authority and the Military Working Dog Registry," Dr. Miller said. "It makes it official. He is yours now." "He was always ours," Luke replied quietly. Luke walked back to the examination room. Titan was awake. The IV bag was empty. Dr. Miller had removed the needle and bandaged the leg. The dog looked better. His eyes held more focus. The heavy exhaustion remained, but the sharp edge of impending death had dulled. "I need to make one more call," Luke told the dog. "I will be right back." Luke stepped outside the clinic. The Arizona sun hung low on the horizon. The sky burned in shades of orange and deep purple. The brutal heat of the afternoon had finally broken, leaving a dry, warm breeze. Luke pulled out his phone. He dialed the number for his new commanding officer at the naval base in Coronado. The phone rang twice. A stern voice answered. "Commander Hayes," the voice said. "Sir, this is Petty Officer Luke Vance," Luke said. He stood straight, reverting to his military bearing. "Vance," the commander replied, "you are not due on base for another 3 days. Are you encountering travel issues?" "No, sir. I am calling to request an adjustment to my housing arrangement. I need authorization to bring a retired military working dog onto the base." The line went quiet for a moment. "A working dog?" Commander Hayes asked. "You do not have a K-9 designation, Vance." "He is a veteran, sir," Luke explained. "Explosive detection, 3 tours in Helmand. He was retired and lost in the civilian system. I found him abandoned in Arizona today. His primary handler was my older brother, sir. He died in action 7 years ago. I am not leaving this dog behind." The silence stretched longer this time. Luke listened to the faint static on the line. He knew he was making a highly unusual request. Base housing had strict rules regarding animals, especially large breeds with combat backgrounds. "Give me his service number," Commander Hayes finally said. Luke recited the tattoo number from memory. Tango 842. "Hold on." Luke waited. He watched the wind kick up small clouds of red dust across the empty parking lot. He thought about the heavy chain, the locked padlock, and the blistering sun. He thought about his brother's letters. "Vance," the commander's voice returned. It sounded softer. "I pulled his file. I see the handler record. Bring him to the base. I will authorize a waiver for your quarters. We take care of our own. Drive safe, son." "Thank you, sir," Luke said. He ended the call. A massive weight lifted off his shoulders. The final obstacle was gone. He walked back into the clinic. "Doctor." Miller had packed a large paper bag. It contained bottles of antibiotics, special high-calorie dog food, and wound care supplies. Luke picked up the bag. He reached for his wallet. "Put that away," Dr. Miller said sharply. "You already paid enough." "I owe you for the medication," Luke insisted. "Consider it a professional courtesy," Dr. Miller replied. He walked around the counter. He extended his hand. "It is an honor to help a veteran. Both of them." Luke shook the older man's hand firmly. "Thank you, Doc." Luke walked over to Titan. The dog watched him approach. Luke did not need to issue a command. He simply leaned down and slid his arms under the dog's body. Titan let out a small grunt, but relaxed immediately into the hold. Luke carried him out the front door. The bell jingled one last time. He placed Titan gently onto the passenger seat of the Ford F-150. He arranged a soft blanket under the dog's burned paws. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and climbed in. He started the engine. The old truck roared to life. The narrator observes that true healing does not erase a scar. It simply removes the pain from the touch, allowing the skin to remember the past without suffering in the present. Luke looked at the empty highway ahead. He felt the truth of that observation in his own chest. The memories of his brother no longer felt like a crushing weight. They felt like a guiding presence. Luke put the truck in gear. He steered back onto Route 66. The road stretched out toward the fading light. The cab was hot, but the air felt different. It was no longer suffocating. 10 miles down the road, the rhythmic hum of the tires filled the silence. Titan shifted on the seat. He moved slowly, his joints stiff and painful. He stretched his neck across the center console. He rested his heavy head on Luke's thigh. Luke did not flinch. He did not tighten his grip on the steering wheel. He simply lowered his right hand and let it rest on the back of Titan's neck. His fingers tangled gently in the coarse fur. The dog let out a deep, contented sigh. The darkness settled over the desert. The headlights of the Ford F-150 cut a bright path through the night. The dashboard lights cast a soft green glow inside the cabin. Luke reached over and turned on the radio. He kept the volume low. A soft acoustic guitar melody filled the space, replacing the harsh silence that had accompanied him for so many days. Titan twitched his ears at the sound, but did not lift his head. The dog was dreaming, his paws making tiny running motions against the seat. Luke wondered if Titan was dreaming of Helmand, or if he was dreaming of the time before the war, running through green grass with a young man laughing beside him. Luke chose to believe it was the latter. For 3 years, Luke had driven across the country trying to escape his ghosts. He had sought isolation in empty deserts and quiet barracks. He had believed that being completely alone was the only way to survive the war that raged inside his head. He looked down at the sleeping dog. The rhythmic rise and fall of Titan's chest matched the steady beating of Luke's own heart. The isolation was broken. The quiet companion beside him had fought in the same dirt, breathed the same dust, and loved the same man. They drove west. The sky turned completely black, littered with millions of stars. Luke kept his hand on the dog. He kept his eyes on the road. They were 2 wounded soldiers heading toward a new duty station, but for the first time in a very long time, Luke felt absolutely certain that they were finally going home. Sometimes the broken pieces of our lives are put back together by the very things we think we are just passing by. Luke thought he was just saving an abandoned animal on a lonely stretch of Route 66, but in reality, that dog was placed on his path to save him right back. As someone who tells these stories, I am constantly reminded that grief might build walls around our hearts, but love and loyalty will always find a way to break them down. Titan and Luke were 2 wounded soldiers who had lost the same piece of their souls. The universe, in its quiet and mysterious way, brought them together so they would not have to walk the rest of their journey alone. May God bless you and your loved ones with the strength to keep going, even on the hardest days. If you believe that miracles can happen when we choose compassion, please type Amen in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder of hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring journeys.